Okay. So, yeah, the topic of my speech today is the Thalys. I'm going to talk to you, first of all, about the history of the train, and then talk to you a little bit about the current situation with some figures and also some events um, linked to the Thalys. So, first of all, I'm sure you'll be familiar with the Thalys. If you've been to Paris or Brussels or Amsterdam, you'll have seen the distinctive burgundy train. It's very sleek. It's obviously a very fast train. But you might not know about its history. I certainly didn't know much about its history before writing this speech. So the history of the Thalys goes back to 1924. Back then, there was an express train which was created between an express service between Paris and Brussels. And by the 1970s, this train was able to connect Paris and Brussels in 2 hours and 30 minutes. As some of you know, I drove from Paris to Brussels on Sunday night, and it took me over 3 hours. So that's already quite good to be able to link the two cities in 2.5 hours. And then in 1987, a decision was made to create a high-speed line to connect the two cities, and actually to broaden the service to include Amsterdam and Cologne. And then in 1993, the railway companies of the four countries in question, so the SNCF in France, the SNCB in Belgium, Nederlands Spoorwegen, apologies for my Dutch, in the Netherlands, and Deutsche Bahn in Germany, all decided to create and operate this service under the banner of the name Thalys. Now, probably most of you don't know where the name Thalys comes from. I certainly didn't until recently. I assumed it was a Greek goddess of travel or some sort of ancestral homeland, but actually it has no particular meaning. It was just a name that was made up, which would be quite easy to pronounce in different languages. So now you know that Thalys doesn't actually mean anything. And then on the 4th of June 1996, the first Thalys left the Gare du Nord in Paris and arrived in Brussels just over 2 hours later. And it arrived in Amsterdam after about 5 hours. So that's a marked improvement on the situation before, where it took 2.5 hours in the 1970s. Now it takes just over 2 hours by 1996. And anyone who's taken the Thalys recently will know that it actually takes only about 1 hour and 20 minutes to travel from Paris to Brussels. And the train has been improved. There have been lots of updates and lots of technical improvements, which means that the train can now reach a peak of 300 kilometers an hour. And the tracks have also been updated. So it means that it's a very fast trip indeed. So, what about the routes that the Thalys operates? Well, there's obviously Paris to Brussels. The Paris to Brussels line also goes on to Amsterdam or branches off to go to Cologne. But there are also other destinations which have been added to the Thalys network over time, like Aachen in Germany, Liège in Belgium rather, Antwerp, Rotterdam in the Netherlands. So there are all sorts of other destinations that you can travel to. And as well as destinations in the north of Europe, you can also go to the south of France, for example. There's a special service called Thalys Soleil, so Thalys Sun, which can take you down to Avignon and Marseille in the south of France. And there's a special service for skiers, for people who want to go off to the Alps for their winter holidays. So you can go on a special service called the Thalys Neige or Thalys Snow. So this is a fantastic service. You can go to all sorts of different destinations, not just Paris, Brussels, and Amsterdam. Now, I'll give you some key figures, some more business commercial figures, and to do with the different markets. So the Thalys serves 4 main markets: France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany. And the majority of passengers travel from Paris to Brussels. That is the main service that the Thalys offers, and it also represents the lion's share of passengers. So it caters largely to business travelers. I'll give you some more information about that in a moment. And so 55% of the revenue comes from the Paris-Brussels service. And then around 9% of revenue comes from Paris to Belgium, other cities in Belgium, apart from Brussels, like Liège and Antwerp. Then 21% of revenue comes from Paris to the Netherlands, especially Paris to Amsterdam. 12% of revenue comes from Paris to Germany. And then the other services that I mentioned before, like the summer sun service and the winter holiday service, that accounts for about 2.5% of revenue. So quite a small proportion. Now, the Thalys has really been a success story because the passenger numbers and the revenue, the turnover of the service, have risen gradually, steadily over the years. If we look back at the earliest figures which are available about passenger numbers, for example, 4.72 million people took the Thalys in 1998. And last year's figures were much higher than this. Last year, about 8 million people took the Thalys over the course of the year. So it's definitely a success, there's no doubt about it. And because it's mainly aimed at business travelers, there are a number of loyalty programs for regular travelers. So you can do what I do, for example. I'm a regular traveler, but I'm also someone who doesn't like to spend money on these things. So I have a free account called Thalys World, and that's an online account. You have an account number, and you can get points every time you travel. And there are certain advantages linked to that. So, for example, you can get a discount on future tickets, and you can change your train at the last minute without having to pay anything. And then on the opposite end of the scale, there's a very luxurious premium service called Thalys Club Plus, which offers you maximum flexibility. It means you can take any train at the last minute as long as there are seats left. You get access to lounges. You get invitations to different events. So yeah, there are these different loyalty programs that you can sign up to depending on how much you travel and how often you and how much you're willing to pay, basically. So I think it'd be a good idea to switch interpreters now. I'm more or less halfway through my speech. So this model that I was talking to you about loyalty cards, loyalty programs, it might sound quite familiar because it's a model that the Thalys has taken from airlines. And actually, there is a connection to air travel here. You might think it's surprising. I'm talking about railways, I'm talking about train services. So what is the connection to air travel? Well, as you'll probably know, Paris and Amsterdam, so Paris, especially Charles de Gaulle, and Amsterdam Schiphol, are two of the major hubs for air travel in Europe. And the two major airlines of France and the Netherlands, KLM from the Netherlands and Air France from France, merged in 2004. Now, the distance between Paris and Amsterdam is around 500 kilometers. And that's a kind of awkward distance because it's too long to drive, but it's also not too short, but it's quite short and quite unenvironmentally friendly to fly between Paris and Amsterdam. So the Thalys, a high-speed train like the Thalys, is actually perfect to bridge the gap between the two cities. So, for example, imagine me here in Brussels. Imagine I want to travel to Latin America or to Asia, and the prices are quite high from Brussels. So I decide, oh, I'll see if there are any decent tickets from Paris or from Amsterdam. Now, instead of flying from Brussels to Paris or from Brussels to Amsterdam, I could take the Thalys. And now the Thalys has come up with a very good idea, which is to connect the train ticket to the plane ticket. So it means that when you go onto a search engine, for example, and you look for a cheap ticket or a good deal to go to, for example, Asia or Latin America, sometimes you see a kind of strange code coming up beside the airport. And it's not actually an airport at all that's coming up. It's the railway station here in Brussels. So you go on, you type in Brussels to Buenos Aires, for example, and the ticket includes you get a train ticket from Brussels to Paris Charles de Gaulle, for example, and then a plane ticket on from Charles de Gaulle to Buenos Aires. So I think this is a fantastic idea. It means that when I go to the airport, to the train station here in Brussels, I can go along with all my luggage, and there's a special desk of KLM and Air France, and I can check in as if I'm checking in at the airport. I can put all my luggage. I can check in all my luggage. I don't have to take it onto the train myself. And it's all sold through the same website. The ticket includes the train and the plane. So it's really a good example of what transport experts call multimodality. So that means that you're using several different modes of transport in with just one ticket. So it's very convenient for travelers, and it's also good for the environment. Oh, someone's asked me to share the website. I don't know what. Okay, I'll do that later. So, as I've said, this is all very positive so far. I've given you lots of advantages of taking the Thalys, but it's not all been rosy. It's not all been easy for the Thalys. First of all, Deutsche Bahn decided that they no longer wanted to sell Thalys tickets, so that had a financial impact on the business model. And then there was also, there have been a number of accidents, of course, but that's par for the course with any mode of transport. And probably the most famous incident involving the Thalys took place in August 2015, when there was an attempted terrorist attack. So in this situation, during this attempted terrorist attack, 3 passengers actually managed to confront the terrorist. It was someone who had a knife and who wanted to murder the people on the train. But 3 passengers, there were 3 American passengers who I think had a military background. They managed to confront the terrorist and disarm him. And luckily, no one was harmed in the process. But this incident became even more famous because it was turned into a film, which is called the 1517 to Paris. So it was the 1517 train from Amsterdam to Paris. And it was directed by Clint Eastwood. And something that was quite interesting about this film was that the real life passengers played themselves in the film. Personally, I haven't seen the film. I heard that it wasn't very good, but if you're interested in the Thalys and you want something to pass the time, you might want to take a look at it. Another downside of the Thalys, as anyone who takes it regularly will know, is the cost. It's really a very expensive service. If you book at the last minute, it usually costs about €200 return. So it's not a cheap service at all. You could probably get a flight for a little bit cheaper than that. But it's a very comfortable service. It's a very nice service to take. So personally, I think it's worth the money. But if you're a bit strapped for cash, there is an alternative, which is the Easy, which is spelled I-Z-Y. It's probably a play on words with how certain people in different countries pronounce the English word easy. Yeah, and it was launched in 2016, as I think I've said, and it was really inspired by low-cost airlines. So you can only book tickets online. There's no ticket office that you can go to. There's a limited luggage allowance, so you can't go on with as much luggage as you want. You can only have a carry-on case and a bag that you will stow somewhere in special compartments. There are fewer members of staff on the train, so you don't have the sort of personalized service that you get with the Thalys. And there's no Wi-Fi, and there's also no dining car. So you need to make sure you buy a sandwich or something before you go on the train. It's also a slower service than the Thalys because it doesn't use the high-speed lines in France. That's a way that they lower their costs, that they don't have to pay the SNCF extra money to use the high-speed line. So it takes anywhere between 2 and 2.5 hours on the Easy, which is about an hour more than the regular Thalys. But if you're saving a lot of money, I think it's worthwhile.